Welcome to the best podcast on this side of the universe.
We share, we learn, and we create.
The Geek Corner.
Hey folks, this is the Geek Corner. Make sure you check all of our creations. Our content was produced for LTpedia.
Hi Geek Corners, Adolfo Jonathan here. Welcome to the very first episode of the Geek Corner. In this episode we are talking about environmental issues, taking as a starting point the movie Okja. We are not talking about the movie per se, but instead use it as a bridge to talk about different environmental issues. Here we have a piece of advice for some of you. If you are a teacher concerned about the environment and want to transmit that concern to your students, well, you will totally love this podcast. Because at the end, we are going to give you some strategies to introduce topics like this to your classes. So, before we start, let me introduce you to our guests today. They are Christian Moreno and Diana Romero. They both are WIS students and very concerned about the environment. Welcome to you two and thank you for being here sharing your knowledge with us.
Hello, thank you for the invitation.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
Okay, people, first of all, we're going to give you a short synopsis of the movie. As people who love movies and pop culture, we want to present you a movie which received a 4 Minute Stand Innovation at the 2017 Cannes Film Festival. We're talking about Okja, a Bong Joon-ho's film. Okja is the story of a South Korean girl called Mija living with her grandfather and a super pig called Okja breeded by the Miranda Corporation. The story is centered in 2007. After Okja is declared as the best big pig by the corporation, they tell Mija they want to take Okja to New York. When the corporation is carrying the pig in a truck, they are stopped by the Animal Liberation Front, and it becomes a chaos resulting in Mija finding Okja and running away from this. However, a member from the Animal Liberation Front inserts a recording device in Okja's ear and let Miranda Corporation recapture the pig to record, with the help of the device, the animal mistreatment present in the corporation, but without Mija's consent. And this is the beginning of the adventure present in the movie.
This movie is so interesting because it portrays several environmental issues that all of us should be concerned about. For instance, the meat industry, vegetarianism, veganism, animal rights, and the GMOs. We are talking about some of these topics in this podcast, so let's begin.
So guys, first of all, have you seen the movie?
Yeah, I've watched it. I thought it was pretty interesting. I hadn't seen anything that was directed by Bong Joon-ho.
What about you, Diana?
Yeah, I watched it too recently actually, and I think it's excellent. It's a beautiful movie, and I think it was a great way to portray through fiction like these problematics of the meat industry, of how these big companies work, and also the protection of animals.
So you both liked the movie?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
A lot, yeah.
Okay, that's perfect for today's podcast.
When it comes to the environment, people all around the world have different opinions and thoughts regarding issues surrounding this topic. So first of all, we want to address the most important topic that the movie portrays, and it is the meat consumption and whether people should become vegan or vegetarian.
Yes, so for this first part, we have the most debatable question, that is, should people become vegan or vegetarian? Most of the people ask this question to themselves. So in this part, we're going to talking about the meat consumption, the vegan and vegetarian differences. There are differences, little but they are, and pros and cons of this. And finally, we are going to talk about ways in which vegetarians and vegans save the planet. Do you think that they save the planet? We are going to start with the question. So, what do you think produce more greenhouse gases, the transport sector or the livestock sector? For example, Christian, what do you think produces more gases?
Well, as far as I know, the livestock sector produces more greenhouse gases than the transport sector because it requires a larger amount of land, and the livestock itself produces methane gas, which also aids to the phenomenon of global warming. So, at least as far as I know, I don't know if I'm wrong, the livestock sector produces more greenhouse gases.
And you, Diana, what do you think? You agree with Christian?
Yes, I agree. I know that the greenhouse is the biggest producer of the greenhouse because of the reasons Christian mentions over the transportation sector, definitely.
Yes, and the answer is that you both were right. Why? The livestock sector produced, according to a research made by some investigators, produced 18% more than CO2 that the transport sector produces. So yes, the livestock sector is contaminating the planet.
So, according to this, how do you think that eating meat affects the planet?
Well, I think it affects in all ways possible. First, it spends a lot of water. To produce 1 kilogram of calf, you need 10,000 liters of water, which is a lot. And also, around 30% of the Earth's surface is taken only to produce livestock. And in the Amazon, like here, national, it's 70% of the land. So those are the two biggest ways. And as we said before, the greenhouse effect.
Okay, and what do you think, Christian?
Adding to what Diana has said, well, I think eating meat affects the planet because it's also a compounding effect in regards to the sectors that are involved in the meat production, not only in raising the livestock and the land consumption, but also the transport of said livestock or beef or whatever meat you're selling implies a large environmental impact and usually very fragile environments. And the fact that it consumes so much land also aids to the illegal economies that are sometimes found on these territories, which aids in order to, or rather, it aids these illegal economies, illegal actors, and phenomena such as deforestation and so on and so forth. So I think it affects the planet in a lot of ways.
Yes, you are both right. Eating meat, it is one of the main causes of global warming, land degradation, air and water pollution, and loss of biodiversity.
Yes, guys. Now the next question. Do you think that there is difference between vegan and vegetarian? Because most of the people say, oh, you're vegan or you're vegetarian. But they use both terms. Do you think there is any difference between these terms?
Well, I think they're different, but I'm not exactly sure how. I think vegetarian people eat dairy products and eggs and maybe fish, but I don't know the specifics. And whereas vegans do not.
Okay, and Diana, what do you think? Is there any difference between these terms?
Yeah, as far as I know, vegetarians do not eat meat, any meat, not cow, no pig, no chicken, no fish. And vegans don't consume anything that comes from animals. No milk, no eggs, nothing that comes from animals.
Okay, again, you are both right. Yeah, vegetarians don't consume meat. Coming from chicken, coming from fish, coming from cows, they don't eat it. But the difference is that vegans don't consume dairy products. For example, eggs, honey, and milk. And they also avoid to wear clothes made from animals. So that is the difference. They avoid anything about the animals, and the vegetarians just don't eat meat, but milk, eggs, this is good for them.
Okay, now to finish this section of the podcast, what do you think are the pros and the cons of being vegetarian?
Well, I think the pros are first that you are not harming so much animals. Also, it has some health benefits, like well managed, it has some health benefits regarding cancer and diabetes. Also, that you are decreasing the carbon footprint by not eating meat, especially. Also, it helps not to benefit these big companies, these industries that gain a lot of money from this exploitation. Those are the pros. And for the cons, well, it's really hard to become vegan because we have been raised to eat meat. It also has some health issues not well managed. And I would say another con is that it's not easy to find vegetarian food chains or also vegan or vegetarian products in the market.
What do you think, Christian?
Well, I think in regards to the pros, a lot has been said by Diana, but I add to that it requires or it builds up discipline to become vegan or vegetarian because it also requires a lot of sacrifice. So I think it's a part of a personal transformation. So I think it's a very good thing on an individual level. But on the cons, well, it's mostly about availability. I think there are places where you cannot avoid eating meat, or some people do not have the means to avoid eating meat because or trying to supplement that food in various ways. And there are not enough restaurants or supermarkets that specialize or even distribute vegan or vegetarian products, which may change as time goes on. But right now, it's very difficult to try to handle this problem for vegetarian and vegan people. Even most public institutions do not serve vegan or vegetarian menus.
Okay, that's right. There are some pros and some cons, but it's the decision of the people to become vegan or vegetarian.
Want to see what's new? Stay tuned, stay geek in the Geek Corner. Want to see what's new? Stay tuned, stay geek in the Geek Corner.
So we're going to pass to the next topic. That you remember that you both said that you have seen the movie. So in the movie, the name Object was because of the pig. So this was not a normal pig, it was a DNA altered pig. So this is called a GMO, which means genetically modified organism. So this is our second topic that the movie portrays. So here is a little question. Are you in favor or against the GMOs? There is the most debatable question that this topic brings. So first of all, we're going to talk about what are GMOs. So they are organisms, according to an article published by Life Science, that has had the DNA altered or modified in some way through genetic engineering. In most cases, GMOs have been altered with DNA from another organism, like a bacterium, a plant, or a virus, and they are called the transgenic organisms. Also, we have in this part two kinds, the plants and the animals. The plants, since several years, they have been from consumption of people. We are consuming the majority of the plants, and the products that we bought are genetically modified plants or products. And the animals too, but they are mostly for research purposes, for investigators to find if animals transmit diseases or to investigate the genes that they have, mixing the genes of animals. Some people are in favor, some people are against this, and there are some pros and some cons supposedly that GMOs has. So we have some possible questions for you guys. Would you eat a GMO? For example, Christian, would you eat it? A GMO? It could be a plant or an animal.
I'd eat a plant. I wouldn't eat an animal that was genetically modified, but I think I could eat a plant.
Okay, and Diana, what do you think? Do you eat it?
Yeah, I think unfortunately we have it in everyday consumption. It is found everywhere, like genetic modified, mostly in vegetables and fruits.
Are you in favor or against GMOs?
Well, it is hard to say that I'm against it because it would consider a coherence from my part to stop eating genetically modified organisms, and it is a very difficult thing to do because of the market and how things are produced in big quantities.
And what about you, Christian?
Well, I think it's a little bit more complex than being for or against. I'm certainly against GMOs or genetically modified animals because I think it's rather cruel to specially breed an animal and modify its DNA for consumption or consumption. I think GMOs are useful when it comes to plants, fighting back bugs and other diseases that may come to the plants that are modified in order to resist more. I think that's actually a good thing. And we have, as humans, modified our plants or crop structures, not through these technologies, but naturally. So I think it's not that irrational for us to consider eating GMOs or producing GMOs when it comes to plants. What I will be against is a corporate monopoly of this modification, and which would and usually forces small farmers with traditional techniques to adapt, and sometimes it takes them out of business. So I wouldn't be entirely opposed against genetically modified plants, but I think there will need to be a very strict regulation, and it wouldn't outrule or prohibit traditional techniques from small farmers.
This is so important what you have touched. That is that you are not totally against the GMO plants, but you think that GMOs animals are cruel doing this. So we have a question that is like the root of the debate in this part of the GMOs. And do you think, guys, that controlling the DNA of an organism, it could be a plant or an animal or wherever, is like playing to be God? This is the root of the debate. For example, Diana, what do you think?
Well, I don't know if that would be a good relation. As Christian was saying, there is certain levels of modifying things genetically, and I think some are necessary because of the production of food we require, for example, for vegetables and fruits. But for animals, I do think it's wrong and not respecting like nature from them, and also a little bit dangerous.
Okay, and Christian, what do you think on this topic?
I'm not a very religious person, so I don't think, as Diana said, the comparison is strictly appropriate. But I think there should be limits to what we can modify and we can't modify. Mostly when it comes to the suffering of the organisms which are being modified. When it comes to practices, protocols, and modifications, there should be a bioethical limit as to what you can do, what you can do. But I wouldn't call it playing God. We have modified through breeding and other means various organisms, both animal and plant life. So I wouldn't say it's playing God, but even we as humans should have limits.
Yes, and for us also is like a complicated topic, saying that this is to be God, because as you say, Christian and Diana, there should be limits. All everything with limits.
To finish this part, the last question is: do you agree with the production of GMO animals for laboratory research or consumption?
No, definitely no. I'm against all research done in animals.
Yeah, I agree with Diana here. I think it's cruel. I think it's really cruel to. Well, I think it's a plant. The plant's on the ground. There is nothing that it feels, at least as far as we know, in a sentient manner. But I think experimenting on animals is really cruel.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe, the Geek Corner.
And finally, the last part of this podcast is dedicated to teachers on how to introduce environmental topics into their classes and make the students a little more aware of the planet we live in. So if you are not a teacher but want to stay, you are so welcome.
So, first of all, before talking about the topic, we want to ask you regarding the importance that this kind of topics, environmental issues, have for the future of society. Why do you think that teachers do not teach these subjects related to the environment more often in the classroom? For example, coming to the national field here in Colombia, why do you think that teachers do not provide students with more methodological and pedagogical practices to make them aware about the environment? For example, Christian, why do you think they don't do that?
I think it's partially when it comes, it's partially due to a lack of resources for teachers. They do not usually tend to explore how to teach their classes with a different methodology or different content because there is not much room for experimentation. There are, for example, not a lot of resources for field trips or other manners through which environmental issues could be talked about in the classroom. But there's also the thing about both the training that the teachers receive and their will to teach these kind of things. I think there should be a very from the top down policy in regards to environmental teaching, because if teachers aren't taking the initiative, there needs to be a state policy when it comes to teaching these things that are so important right now and for the future, which I don't think exists, such as a class specifically dedicated to environmental topics, which some schools have because they want to, but some do not because either they can't or they don't want to.
Yep, and you, Diana, why do you think this happens into the classrooms?
Yeah, I think Christian covered it very well. Like those are the main reasons. But I think it has to do a lot with not having the training as teachers to do it and not having the information because nationally and worldwide we are not aware of everything that is happening. There is not a societal set of mind to know all the problematics, and also there are not policies and programs and activities national that promote the caring of the nature. So it's a little bit hard to take them to the classroom when there are none. And also because I think it's something that is not included in the syllabus. So like it is not required to be taught, and it is very hard to just have the one to teach these subjects and not having the enough resources, information to pass it.
Okay, guys, one additional question is what do you think could be some way in which teachers could teach subjects related to the environment into their classes?
Well, I think the most basic one, honestly cheap one, would be taking the students out for a stroll in a place which has been environmentally impacted, which there are many of, be it a park or a nearby river or any other manner of environmental impacted space or place. It really hammers the point home about the existence of these issues, such as actively involving the students in activities which help mitigate these environmental problems, such as cleaning up trash in natural spaces and so on and so forth. I think it aids. It's a very practical aid to trying to teach these topics.
Okay, thank you, Christian. And what about you, Diana?
Yeah, I consider the most important part is to raise the conscious and awareness of what is happening. So that's how it happened to me. Like that's how I started becoming involved to these environmental issues because I saw and I was aware of what was happening, all the problematics and issues. There are a lot of things that can be done to raise awareness, and I think it should also start by making students question themselves about their life and about their habits. I think it also starts with habits and how you can have a more sustainable life.
Okay, guys, so now we are going to give you some strategies and some projects that we found in, you know, that in the internet there are many pages, educational and pedagogical pages, which offers you with some projects or some tasks to make to the students. So we found one that is Edutopia, and it offers three kinds of projects regarding environmental issues that we can implement into the classrooms or into our partners if we are not teachers as well. So my partner Adolfo is going to introduce you with the first activity that we can do.
Okay, the first way to teach these kind of topics is called from farm to table. Children, as well as adults, know very little about the origin of food they eat every day. In this lesson, you can ask your students to bring different kind of foods they eat every day and ask them how they think these products are made, where they came from, etc. And finally, make a little research to know more in depth about these products.
So what do you think, Beth? For example, yeah, about this activity? You think that it is viable to do in a classroom?
Yeah, I think it's viable to do. I don't think it's that hard, and maybe the resources can be like easy to find. Maybe, yeah.
Yes, that's correct. So now we have a second kind of project for activity that is called the life story of the staff. This is by tracing the origins of the products that they use or that they consume every day. For example, the bikes they use to have a ride to the school or wherever place they want to go, or the favorite sneakers or the favorite t-shirt that they use and that they wear, and develop an understanding of this impact that it is the production, the sale, and the disposal of these used goods have on the environment. For example, talking about fashion or talking about the transportation, they had to look for the origin of this and start seeing if there are problems with the production and with the consumption that humans do of these products. So what do you think, Christian? This is a good activity to do in a classroom. They could raise their awareness of the environment with this activity, this kind of project.
Yeah, I think it's viable. I think tracing down the origins of product of a specific product is now also much easier by using the internet. And young children are much more used to accessing online resources. So I think it's a very viable alternative.
Okay, and the final method for teaching environmental topics is for more advanced students. It's called How Big is Your Footprint? After you have taught your students what is the ecological footprint through the use of ICTs, they calculate what is their ecological footprint.
Yes, and then after doing that, the group is going to determine the footprint with the help of the ICT, that is the information and communication technology, internet, and they are going to present that the footprint to the entire class. Then after that, you as a teacher can have a discussion on ways on how to reduce their footprint and the impact of their consumption, the impact of their production, and etc. and so on and so forth. Do you think, guys, both of you, that this activity could be easier for them and make them awareness about the environment and the problematic situations that we have now, maybe in the future to implement this kind of activities? Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it is a good activity because finding out your footprint, it's really shocking. And it also gives you some tips and ideas of where you can like reduce or start changing some things. But I also like the fact that they are also giving ideas and thinking about ways themselves.
Yes, and you, Christian, what do you think?
I think it's a very good idea. I also think that there should be like introduction to the concept of a carbon footprint and environmental issues before the activity in order to accustom the children to the concept, because it's sometimes very difficult to wrap your head around the issue of a carbon footprint. But I think with some introductions to these topics and these issues, it could be a very viable alternative and it could potentially impact their actions in the future.
Yes, and as those ones, there are many activities on the internet, or you can also be a creative teacher or a creative person to do some extra activity in your classes to make students aware of the environment and the planet we are living in, and that, for example, with this pandemic, there are problematics that can reduce the impact by reducing our consumption in some products and by making us aware and thinking about the planet when we are doing something.
Okay, guys, to conclude, we can say that Okja is a movie that calls to action about all the environmental issues that our planet is suffering because of our fault, from animal abuse to GMOs and the destruction and pollution of the planet. From this, it is very obvious that with the global quarantine, the planet has taken a break from us, and we must see this as a good opportunity to reevaluate all our actions that affects the planet for not doing them again. Because to some point, what is happening now is due to our own fault.
So, guys, Christian and Diana, we are finishing this podcast. Do you have some final thoughts, some final comments, or something that you want to say regarding this topic? Final thoughts or final opinions that you have. For example, Christian, what do you think about this topic and the production of this podcast?
I think Okja and other movies and art calling into attention issues should make us and translate into action, should make us act up, even in a local level, in a small level, cleaning a river, picking up trash, or even in your house, turning off lights when they are not used, or another many ways, small ways in which you can impact and help the planet. These movies should really move us to do that. And maybe my final message would be, this is not only an issue to speak about, but to act on. So I think it's very important that we do that.
And Diana, your final thoughts and opinions.
Yeah, I would like to thank you guys for talking about this. I think it is very important and nowadays to start debating these kind of topics because they are usually and currently not being addressed enough. I would also like to say that it is very important to consider all of these things, especially because when I was back in school, for example, I wasn't taught at all about how to be more environmental friendly. And it is important also to take that to the classrooms today. And as Christian was saying, I think small actions do make a big change. So it is never too late to start. I would like to finish with a quote that has impacted me. That is, from knowing comes caring, and from caring comes change.
Okay, that's really good. Yeah, thank you guys. You too. And yeah, we have to care about the planet, and we also have to make activism because it is important to care and also to make other people aware. So, well, guys, that's all for today's episode of this Geek Corner podcast. Thanks for listening, guys. Hope you have enjoyed this topic. Also, thanks to our guests, Christian Moreno and Diana Romero, for joining us and sharing your thoughts and knowledge today. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much to you and to the listeners.
Thank you very much for the space.
Okay, Geekers, join us again for the second episode of this podcast where we are going to discuss the movie Endgame and many other surprises. And remember, we won't exist as a society if we destroy the environment.
Wanna see what's new? Stay tuned in the Geek Corner.